Welcome to What the Heck's, your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 super annoying distraction push equivalents. I'm your co-host Davey, and with me as always I got Phil. How are you doing, Phil?
I'm doing all right.
All right. We'll get into that. There's a little hesitancy there, and I think I know what it is. So we'll come back around to that. But we gotta give a shout to our guest today. We got Cam. Welcome, Cam. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Cam, we'll get to an introduction in just a little bit, but before we do that, we'll talk our usual things. We got context. We have most recently we know that Hrothgorn's man trappers are on the way, but most significantly is the new Forsaken and Restricted list dropped. And for those who didn't notice or didn't remember, that is Keep Them Guessing and Aggressive Defense have been Forsaken. It is banned from Championship, and Restricted were Temporary Victory, Scrum, Tome of Vitality, Rebound, and Transfixing Stare. And what was cool about this is that it also came out with an article by Dave Sanders kind of explaining some of the reasoning about it. But any initial thoughts on these, Phil?
Yeah, I guess one, I did really appreciate having sort of the explanation that well, I still wish that some of these cards were not gone forever. I do understand it, and it does make sense, and having that sort of level of transparency is something that you don't usually get in an FAQ or an errata. So I do appreciate that. In terms of cards that I was surprised to see go, Keep Them Guessing was really the one that hit me the hardest, just because I've used it so many times. And I didn't see it as being an especially strong card, but of course that's sort of where the description of these Forsaken cards were really ones that required a lot of explanation for how they interacted, and I think designing around them going forward is something they probably decided wasn't worthwhile, so they just said, we're going to move these off and save ourselves a bunch of headaches down the road, which I think is perfectly reasonable. The other thing that jumped out to me was that Tome of Vitality going out effectively means that if you want to play tomes, you have to fill all your restricted slots with tomes and the actual objective itself. So maybe tomes are dead. We'll see.
Cam, what are your thoughts?
They didn't surprise me too much. I liked that both Temp Victory and Scrum got restricted. They seem to be up-and-coming cards and something that was really quickly defining most of the metas that I was seeing. And it made a lot of sense in my mind. I guess, like Phil, I'm a little sad Keep Them Guessing's gone. My Thorns deck is completely destroyed right now, but
everybody
I'm
else
happy.
too.
I'm happy. Transfixing Stare was an interesting pick. I didn't see much play of it, but I mean that could be something that just wasn't very local to our meta, or maybe just the few people that wasn't playing against it.
For me, Transfixing Stare, what I like about that is that it was the most brutal to range one aggro, and that feels like it's one of the things that is in the not as good a place. Rebound, whatever. Enough words have been spent on that, so past that. Tome of Vitality, it's clear what they're. Well, I mean, to me, it seems clear that they're trying to target the Acolyte of the Cataphragms build. There's a little bit of collateral damage there with anybody who is trying to build for durability, because it was essentially another Great Fortitude for a lot of people. And it gives a little step up to anyone who's got an in-faction Great Fortitude. And then I guess, yeah, like you guys, I enjoyed Keep Them Guessing. I put it in many decks, including some decks that I probably shouldn't have put it in. But Aggressive Defense, while I liked it and I was using it in Ripa's, really enjoyed it in that. I think it's a good one to go, because every time I would try to explain the timing window to somebody who hadn't studied thoroughly the ancient texts of the FAQs and such, it always felt like you're trying to pull one over on somebody, right? Well, actually, first I get my reaction attack, and then this thing happens, and then you finally get to make your attack, and by the way, there was no pushing during. You're like, oh man, what is it just felt bad to have to do that. Anyway, so nothing too shocking, but some of it has a pretty big ripple effect on the decks that people are building. We'll get to that in just a second. In the meantime, we'll remind you at the end, but if you want to get in touch with us, it's at WTHcast on Twitter, or ping any of the Facebook. You can come to our The Mortal Realms Facebook page. We're using that a lot more, posting there first, and you can get in contact with us or anybody as part of the network. Speaking of the community, let's do some community shout outs. A big one for me was Chatting Crits. It is the limited edition mini series, whatever term you want to use, that the Steel City Underworlds team is recording. It sounds like they're planning on 6 episodes. They had their first one. They had Amon on, and it was really excellent. Great listen. They were real strong right out of the gate. Good sound quality, and then the subject matter was great too. And that, coupled with some really high level output they're doing on their blog, really want to shout the Steel City folks out. You guys got anything else you want to shout out community wise?
Just the videos from Miniature Fight Club.
Yeah. Wow.
If anybody has not seen those, the production quality is next level stuff. So if you want to check out some real dedication video production for these batreps, that's first stop for sure. Very impressive.
Yeah, it is difficult to oversell the level of production that went into. Like I heard somebody say that we were not the first ones to shout it out. I think Path to Glory mentioned it on their last one, and but hearing somebody say, "Hey, it was really good. You should check it out." I was not prepared for how impressive the production level was. I don't know how much time those guys spend on it, but oof. Well, whatever recognition they get for it, they've earned, because they're putting the hours in there. I'm super duper impressed, and I thought the decks and the quality of play were high as well. So it was up and down the line a really good video to check out. So, oh hey, I got one more shout out. Amber, I know you're expecting a Gets episode. It's on the way. We had some technical difficulties. It's coming. We promise. We'll get it to you. And thanks for listening. So this is a segment. What the heck is going on with you? And Cam, as a first time guest, you are not only going to lead us off, but we'll have you give us a little background. How did you get into miniature gaming, and then what was your jump over to Underworlds, and what has been your general jam, and what has been your jam of late with Warhammer Underworlds?
Sure. So I got my start in I guess all of miniature gaming. My friend in, I want to say high school, actually, a longtime friend, he went to England for a couple years. And when he came back, he brought over this really cool game that was just all the rage over there that no one over in the US had ever heard of back in the time, by a little company called Games Workshop. And I was just absolutely enthralled with the futuristic sci-fi universe of Warhammer 40,000. So I kind of got my start first seeing the minis, playing around with Dawn of War, and then I just kind of really jumped all into 40K. And that kind of led me through meeting most of my friends, and I kind of jumped into competitive play really from that. This local store that I used to frequent over in New Jersey, they had a very active fantasy community before Sigmar came around, and I actually built up a small escalation league there where I started off with vampire counts. So I had a huge, massive vampire army. It was great. And then Sigmar came, killed everything. And I just stopped playing because it wasn't very popular, and kind of shifted my focus into 40K. And then when Night Haunt came out, I jumped all into them. And I said to myself, as soon as Warhammer Underworlds gets a Night Haunt warband, I'm jumping in. And lo and behold, Night Vault came out, and I've been playing ever since.
And true to form, I've not ever seen you play something that was not Night Hunt. It was either Banshees or Thorns. It may have happened, but I wasn't paying attention when it did. Oh, maybe, did you have Guardians? Did you have a little stint as Guardians at one point?
I mean, they're technically spirits and ghosts, too. So,
all right, let the record show. And so lately, it's part of the reason we're having you on tonight is for our coverage of Mournflight, and you've been running them quite a bit. In fact, I think if you started running them as soon as Dreadfane came out. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correct.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get Dreadfane from Barnes & Noble when it was just released, and I started playing them, and I fell in love
Mm-hmm.
with them immediately. We go through the fighters in a little bit. What really drew me to them was one, they kept all the same mechanics that
Mm-hmm.
Thorns had, ignoring the lethals, walking through models. I mean, their whole Inspire mechanic is very unique. The fact that they start on 2 dodge is fantastic. And then just all of their unique abilities,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that I find that they are probably one of the best disruption war bands that I can make.
All right.
I play Dark Eldar and Harlequins in 40k, and I like a lot of the tricksy stuff that I can do, and so this warband really fits my playstyle.
Sure. We'll get more into that in just a sec. But first, Phil, what have you been up to?
I have been crying over my eyes deck.
Crying your eyes out, perhaps.
Unfortunately, yeah, the most recent FAR really did a number on my eyes deck. I've been trying to figure out what I want to do for an upcoming local tournament as well as Adepticon. I'd been playing around with some ideas with Mollog and some ideas with Eyes, and both of those decks ended up having like 6 or 7 restricted cards plus having Forsaken cards. So um, we gotta start over from the ground up. So
All right.
maybe something with Eyes, maybe Reavers.
Okay.
We'll see what happens.
The thing about starting from the ground up is that you have nowhere to go but up. So here you
That is what they say.
go.
We'll see if that's true.
Well, for myself, I have been continuing to mess around with Rippas and continue to find them intriguing and difficult to wrap your head around, and a lot of fun. But I also, for the first time, played as Thundrix. Somehow I'd never played as them. Um, Kind of coinciding, I did in Age of Sigmar pick up the new battle tome for them. I just like their background. Kind of use that as an excuse to check them out, and it felt good. uh, a little callback to the glory days of using them, using the Far Striders. Like, oh, all these ranged attack options. It's so great. So that was a lot of fun, and a little bit of Curse Breakers too. Tried out that German Grand Skirmish / Clash winning deck. Has a ton of chip damage, and that was pretty interesting too. So very different from some of the decks that I've played previously. Let's stop talking about all that stuff. Let's talk about Mournflight. We're gonna give you a rundown. We'll give a quick fighter overview. Talk about some cards we think that are important. Go over strengths, weaknesses, some of the play styles we think are in there, and maybe a little bit of counterplay too. And then their how they slot into the meta. And along the way, it was real short notice, but we got some listener questions here. Appreciate those, and we'll hit them as we go. Fighter overview, and before we even get started here on the fighter overview, we had a listener question. His number one question was, how do I tell them apart? Radek wanted to know that as well, who, unless I'm mistaken, I think is actually one of the miniature flight club guys. So but you got any tricks for telling these ladies apart there, fellas?
I so when I was initially looking at the minis, I figured that by like looking at the direction that they're swooping out of their graves, that's sort of the only indicator of what makes them different. But to me, like, even though I know they're all different,
Yeah.
it's hard to remember which motion goes with which fighter. So
Yeah.
with difficulty, I feel like every time I play someone who's using Mournflight, I'm like, and which one is which again?
So here's my trick. I know Lady Harrow is the upright one because she's the boss.
Yeah,
I know
she's the easy one.
The Widow is the one who's like basically going straight down because she's the one who starts on 2 wounds, so she's low to the ground. And then my trick was distinguishing the Maiden from the Anguish one, but I noticed that the Anguish one is missing her jaw, which I figure hurts a lot, and that's where her anguish is coming from. So
okay.
That helps. You got anything less goofy, Cam?
Yeah. So if I'm using the actual models, which I don't always use the same models, the Anguish one, her dagger is actually facing down, and it's more like a sigh, so it looks like an A, whereas the Scream Maiden has hers holding out, and it looks more like an S, if you will.
Very nice. Okay.
But I have the Garkor model, the store anniversary one. That's the swoopy swirly ghost. I think it's a dread, no, not dreadblade, a Bladegeist Revenant. I use that one as the anguished one, and it makes it really easy just to be like, this is the one that's going to crit you, and you can't do anything about it.
And they do. But let's run through it. So we don't need it every, but like, give me what's notable about the fighter. And Cam, we're going to start with you, Lady Harrow, uninspired and inspired. What makes her notable in the warband?
Sure. So, uninspired as the leader, she starts off with a 3 Fury or Sword. I don't know if y'all prefer what
Fury's fine.
dice
Doesn't
mechanic.
matter.
Yeah, 3 Fury. So it's if you have what's the objective?
Branching Fate.
Thank you. Yes, couldn't think of it tonight. Branching Fate. She's good just to get it right off the bat. But beyond that, she's 4 move and she starts with 4 wounds, uninspired. So she's the tankiest of them all.
Mm-hmm.
And then inspired, all of them have a unique reaction or a unique thing. Hers is the coolest because whenever you declare an attack action against a fighter that's not her, she gets a free push.
And I never remember this, and I always like look in dull amazement as you take this reaction. I'm like, what is happening? Oh no! So, and this trigger after an attack action?
It's after an opponent declares an attack action.
So it does not occupy the after attack action window, but you could use it to come in for support, or just to move on to the other objective, or whatever the case. It's a very flexible thing, right?
Yeah,
indeed.
All right.
She also gets cleave.
Oh,
yeah, cleave, and she goes up to 3 damage.
Yeah, all significant things. I think there's a number of those pieces that I overlook where all of a sudden I'm like, she at least doesn't gain any accuracy, but she does if you have block defense, which many people do because there's a lot of people going on guard. So if you didn't, you do. Pick another one, Anguished one or the Maiden. Which is your next that you want to touch there, Cam?
Oh, Anguished one, because she's my favorite of the bunch. Yeah. So uninspired. A quick point of order, I guess. All of the Banshees uninspired start with 4 movement and 2 dodge, and then when they inspire, they flip over to 5 move and 2 dodge still.
And how do they inspire, Cam?
Oh, so the fighter moved through a hex occupied by an enemy fighter in this activation. I'm glad that Beastgrave clarified that this won't proc during a charge because it is a super action, and then you inspire afterwards. But walking through them and having that 4 move or 5 move, 4 move, is quite a handy little trick to have.
So you'll still inspire. You just will have to take your attack uninspired if you're charging. That's it correct? Yeah,
correct.
We did have a listener question. Bill wanted to know if you can use counter charge in order to inspire during your opponent's turn, and that's a little confusion on part of someone reading that card and thinking of it as a charge. That's just counter charge is a push. You cannot push through an enemy fighter. You can only move through an enemy fighter. So that's a no, Bill. It's got to be a move, and it's got to be. I don't think they have any out of activation moves, but it even says activation. So even if you manage to find a way to move out of activation, you're still, if you're playing Relic and good old ready for actions around, even that won't do it for you. But back to the Anguished one.
Yeah. So uninspired, she's a little unnotable. She has 3 wounds, so she is a decent fighter. 2 fury, 2 damage. When she inspires, she jumps up to 4 wounds, which is the nice little defensive buff. But the big thing is she goes to 3 fury. She's still 2 damage with her piercing chill blade. But if you use that weapon, and that's a key thing that I want to point out, it has to be the piercing chill blade. Rolls of crit do not count as crit successes or successes at all for defense rolls against that attack action.
That is a wild accuracy boost, as it turns out. Like it takes away a lot of pips on the defense dice for half of the faces that are helpful, and the crit, which would normally stop you. So as soon as you hit like 2 successes against one defense fighter, you've got the hit. It is rough.
I mean, if she rolls any crits, she just automatically hits too, which is kind of insane. So you can really take advantage of that by, stacking extra dice and stuff and just fish for 1 crit and you get the hit.
What about her partner in crime, the Maiden?
Yeah, so just like her, Maiden uninspired 4, 2, and 3. Also 2 fury, 2 damage. Same starting stats. However, when she inspires, She keeps her 3 wounds, but she goes up to 4 fury, still at 2 damage with her lethal blade. And her special thing is that on crit, she gets
Mm,
plus 1 damage. So an insane accuracy boost with going from 2
mhm,
to 4 dice, and it increases that crit chance
mhm.
significantly. If only hidden weapon
Oh,
wasn't
concealed weapon. Yeah.
a relic, because concealed weapon, yeah,
Oof a
wasn't
doof.
relic
Yeah.
anymore.
uh,
Still a fighter's
uh,
ferocity, though.
Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, going from 2 to 3 damage on a crit is really nice, especially when you're rolling 4
yeah.
dice minimum.
And now, how about the one that feels a little bit about the odd one out, the widow?
So she's the weakest starting with a 4/2/2. She does have 2 fury, and she keeps 3 damage on her weapon. When she inspires, she jumps up to the nice 3 health that I like. Still 2 fury for 3 damage, but she does get an extra action if she has no move tokens. Place the fighter in any empty hex and give her a move. Nice for scoring shortcut. Nice for really repositioning across the board. Before the updated far list, it was nice for getting a loner late
Yeah.
game too.
Yeah, this honestly, this is a fighter that when I first looked at their cards, this is one I was most excited about because it seemed really, really good. I just have never, I've very rarely seen it actually happen in a game, um, and we can get into some of the why about that later. But it's interesting. It feels like another one, kind of like Lady Harrow's push. Like if you somehow overlook this, you can get really surprised by something. I think maybe it's because an action is kind of a lot to ask for something, even if it is powerful. There's often something more useful you could do with it. But actually, let's talk about that inspire. So you have to get in, with the inspire condition. You talked about what the actual mechanic of it was. Uh, Talk to me about how that feels on the table. Like, do you think it's a particularly powerful inspire condition, or is it or challenging, or where does it fall on that spectrum, in your opinion?
I think it's a very mixed bag. In some cases, it's a very easy inspire condition. If you've built your deck to be very aggro and you're fighting an aggro warband, it's probably going to be a faster inspire game. If you're playing a more defensive Mournflight or fighting a more defensive warband, you're probably not going to get very many inspires until I've had it as late as the third round
Hmm.
before I got anyone inspired.
Yeah, I can say facing them with an aggro warband, it does feel bad to. I'm going to bomb somebody in there to try and get a kill. Hopefully, get through that 2 dodge. And then if you don't, then he said, "Oh man, then now a bunch of ghosts are just going to go running right through me." And now not only will I have not killed one, but they're all inspired, or many of them are. So, but like you said, if it's a standoff, because if you are not inspired and you don't have any card help, in order to do this, you need to be standing, what, 3 away to be able to do it,
Correct. Without any upgrades, yeah.
which is actually pretty close. So that's why some cards that we will talk about are particularly important for them. And I think, honestly, I think that's some of why I haven't seen the Widow as much, because if she's close enough to have inspired, a lot of times she's kind of in the mix, and that move is maybe not as important. She's already maybe where she wants to be, or some such. But
And talking about inspirations and inspiration mechanics, as a warband, how important do you feel inspiration is to this one?
I guess going up with the accuracy, really the one that wants it the most in priority, I'd say probably be Anguish 1, because obviously cutting out crits for defense is amazing. I'd probably put Lady Harrow right after that, just because the extra push is good to catch off guard. After that, I could really give or take if the Widow gets inspired, and the Screaming Maiden having that extra dice is really nice, but not necessarily game breaking.
Sure. And I imagine that's probably somewhat determined by playstyle as well.
Definitely. If I had like a more aggro build and I need to rush up there, I'd probably prioritize the Screaming Maiden and Anguish 1 over Lady Harrow.
so that's a look over the fighters and the inspiration. Let's talk cards, and it all starts with objectives. So, in our usual fashion, we're going to talk about what in faction objectives are of note and which ones out of faction are of note. And I think in particular we're going to get into this a little bit, but I think what makes them strong, and potentially what makes them strong perhaps long term is that I feel like there's a lot of interesting in faction objectives, so they can kind of keep themselves fueled, whatever happens to the universal pool. Did you find the same, Cam?
Definitely. I think they capitalized on the Beastgrave design space where they are basically giving you an entire warband deck as soon as you get it. So you have your 20 power and 12 objectives, and they made it fairly robust. I'd say I'd play with about 8, maybe 9 of the 12 objectives, and then supplement it, switch it out with whatever
Mm,
universals they have. That just really fit the playstyle.
mm. That's eight or nine in faction is sort of unheard of for
Yeah.
any other faction. So let's hit some of the highlights. I think I would say for me that the signature playing against them is one will and fleeting memories. One will being hold an even and an odd, and fleeting memories is have a fighter move through two. And these are both surges for one. Um, and they were the first. I remember we talked about this, but they were the first that we saw a way of scoring immediately interacting with objectives. Maybe with possible exception of focal formation.
Yep.
But I find those to be signature. Like almost doesn't matter the play style, you're going to see those. Does that seem pretty accurate?
Definitely. They're just too easy to score, especially with, um, I guess, how much of how many pushes they have, and the fact that even if your opponent's playing defensively against you and are playing objectives themselves, they'll probably put them in a close clump so that even if you're going aggro against them, you'll be able to score fleeting memories or hopefully get a one will.
Yeah. And
Right.
and I think an interesting thing to point out with one will is that it's a score immediately in the true sense. It's not like temporary victory or swift capture where it's after an activation. It's just as long as your warband holds one even and one odd, you score. So you can score this in the power step with teleports or pushes, which, um, given their in faction pushes or on the fighter cards having pushes and teleports, it's kind of like, well, this feels almost like
Right.
it's too easy.
Yeah. Well, and both those are objectives that score without relying on any dice. All you got to do is be in those positions. You don't have to succeed in an attack or a defense or anything like that. So big deal there. Another one that doesn't require dice is inescapable hunger. Cam, you want to run that one down for us?
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorites. It is a little bit board dependent. It is a surge. It's a score immediately if a friendly fighter makes a move action that travels through a blocked hex and ends that move action adjacent to an enemy fighter.
Mm-hmm.
So quick and easy if you're just trying to cover ground, no pun intended on that, or even make a charge off of it. You'll still score it because it is still part of the move action of the super action. It's
Mm-hmm.
also good because it really capitalizes on the Banshee's strengths of ignoring blocked lethal, potentially even picking up an inspiration if a fighter's hanging out next to a blocked text. One of the tips that I like to do is always throw one of the objectives next to block text. That way,
Mm-hmm.
if my opponent does try to make an early push for it, there's a chance of me not only inspiring but also picking up glory on it.
Sure. What else? What else catches your attention?
I think one of the overlooked ones I like a lot is Ghostly Torment. It's a dual end phase. If you have 2 or more surviving friendly fighters, and 2 or more surviving fighters have 1 or more wound tokens, get 2 glory. The cool thing about this is that your banshees are fairly resilient, so it's good if you get it even in the first or second round. You're going to have hopefully have 2 banshees around, and it's the second condition, which is kind of overlooked, is that it's any 2 surviving fighters having wound tokens.
Mm-hmm.
So you're already trying to wound your opponent, try to kill him out, but I've sometimes actually left a fighter alive with 1 wound left just to pick up the 2 glory for Ghostly Torment, and then try to pick up the kill the next round.
Yeah, what's crucial about this is that it's a 2 glory end phase, and those are feeling a little bit scarce on the ground now, especially with keep them guessing gone. I found myself reaching more and more for combo strike, which is dangerously unreliable when you prone to bricking. So I think anyone who has a solid 2 glory end phase objective in their in faction cards has got something good going for them.
But
Um,
Davey,
Yes.
They don't have just one True Glory end phase.
Yeah.
They have two.
Oh no. Tell me
Yeah.
more.
They
Um,
even have four, but they're not all as good as some of them.
I guess the big one here is Nexus of Terror. Score an end phase if your warband holds the most objectives. Free two glory.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that is great anti aggro who are not necessarily paying that close of attention to it. I think I was playing Max and I remember like maneuvering to try and I couldn't even remember if this was actually a card, but I was like, I feel like you have a card in your faction that has you hold two, and I was glad I worked against it. But now it's always in my mind, you know. And the thing is they like standing on them anyway, so it's hard to always notice when this is getting set up.
Yeah. I mean, the worst would be someone holds one objective and scores two glory for it, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, rough. Uh, and yeah, so but what about if you want even more than two glory? If you want a three glory third end phase, I got a tasty one.
Oh, yeah. Now you're talking about Dominion over Death.
Yeah,
Score in the third end phase if you scored the most objective cards.
Oh man, it's like what was it called? Superior Tactician all over again.
sure.
Yeah, but it's in faction, so it's never going away.
Never going
Yep.
away. And the only other thing is that it is a little bit dependent on what your opponent has done. So
This is true.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, anything else you want to hit in faction, or should we touch on some of the things that you reach for from out of faction?
I'm good for out of faction here.
All right. What do you like for out of faction?
Um, Actually, I know it's kind of counterintuitive. I like Scrum a lot.
Hmm.
So it's a good counterplay, especially with the larger warbands and the fact that Scrum's so popular. It's nice just to have it as a back pocket. If my opponent has a Scrum, I think Davey, you and we played a game where we both scored Scrum immediately,
Yeah,
turn
first activation,
the first or
round.
second activation.
Yeah. Uh,
Uh,
yeah, I agree.
I mean,
Because and I've done it with Reavers. I don't know if I'll include it now that it's restricted. It's a tough call. But here's what you were talking about here with One Will and Fleeting Memories, being able to score them no matter whether you are needing to be the aggressor or the defender. This gives you something if it's standoff. There's a lot of boards you can set up where a single move gets you this. You know, so and you're fast enough and not worried about blocked or occupied hexes. It's very easy for you to maneuver into a useful position for this.
exactly. I guess a little off the wall pick. I like Shortcut.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it fits more into my playstyle. I have both Confusion and Shifting Reflection in my deck. So
Yeah.
just having two ways of quickly picking it up and also being very disruptive to my opponent. And then on the off chance that the Widow gets inspired, I have an actual action to guarantee me to pick it up Shortcut
Sure.
too.
It's nice to have late game. You know, you want to have one. You want to have the ability to have that on the board if you need another route. If you got forced to use one of your power cards that would score it for you early, or they're buried, it's nice to have something on the board that'll get you there. So I've seen some people take temporary victory. I think there's some play there, but I think it's really nice to not have to worry about whether you have three objectives or two. So I think that may depend. It's real strong. I think you probably don't take supremacy, but you temporary victory. You're fast enough that you could strike in late or widow over on something to grab it. So I don't think someone's wrong for taking it, but I think it's a tougher, especially now that it's restricted. It's a tougher sell than some of the other ones. Phil, you have you seen anything in particular from out of faction for these?
I haven't seen anything since the only person I've seen play them is Cam, but I think Swift Capture is one that could be interesting for them given their ability to move around the board, and if you happen to have the Widow inspired, it's almost guaranteed because you could just put her on whichever one you need. Um, but even if you've just got two objectives in your or if the objective, if you only have two objectives, there's going to be one probably fairly close unless your opponent has been very calculating and keeping their objectives very far away from you.
Mhm.
So it may not actually be all that much to just fly across the middle of the board a little bit and suddenly grab a quick glory that way too.
Yeah. So, I mean, my takeaway between both these in faction and out of faction, especially for your deck, Cam, is that it's a bunch of score immediates that can score regardless of dice. So it's moving, it's positioning. It is I can stand back here and scrum. I can stand back here and shortcut. Uh, and that actually plays pretty nice with the other one that we talked with Dominion of Death, because you can score a bunch of these. You basically say like I am almost certainly going to score 5 or 6 of these plus whatever end phase stuff I can pick up, which really gets you ahead in the race to be able to score Dominion of Death, and hopefully they're glory starved when you get there. So I think those complement each other very well.
Definitely. I think another thing that sort of plays into this a little bit is that they're surprisingly hard to take out. Starting at 2 dodge is a real bear if you don't have any ensnare to deal with it. And they only have the 1-2 wound fighter, and she's probably going to be in the back. So almost nobody is guaranteed to get any kills until at least round 2, probably. And by then, they've probably already done a lot of work. And that's sort of an interesting juxtaposition with Thorns, where you really have to worry about glory bleed because you've got so many of those chain rasps that are easy to kill.
Would you want to talk upgrades or gambits next?
Oh, let's go with gambits. They're too much fun.
Okay, give me some favorites, and we can salt it around a little if you want to in faction, out of faction, however, whatever you're most excited about, throw it at me.
Sure. I'm going to actually start with a weird one here. For in faction, one of my favorites is Dissipate.
Not one of my favorites.
Oh, it's so strong.
Yeah, it's a wonderful reaction. Play during an attack action before the attack roll. Choose a friendly fighter, and they gain an innate dodge, and it'll persist until the end of the attack activation.
This is the first we've seen of this anywhere. First and only so far. Yeah.
Yeah. Besides the fact of the obvious survival boost that you get with a free innate dodge, I like that it occupies the same reaction window as Potion of Rage.
Ooh, I did not notice that. That is rough. All right.
Oh, wow.
I played it against a player, and it was not a fun experience for him. It boosts the card from being like an A+ card already to like an S tier, if you will, for me.
Well, and it's one of the cards we talked about this with some other cards, but this is a sort of card that kind of skews. If you have not played it yet, it skews the whole way I play. Like every time I'm going in, I already am trying to bring a lot of accuracy, but it feels like every time I'm going into anything, like I cannot bring enough accuracy. Like until that goes, I got to assume that it's in hand, and I'm overkilling accuracy on every attempt, and it's powerful just in the fact that it exists.
Yeah, for sure. And like this is sort of like when you do things like what's it called, demonic resilience, where you sort of wait. You can see that your opponent's building up, but this is even better because you get to do it as a reaction. So you can wait and be like, okay, they're playing all the cards. Okay, well, even if you don't necessarily need that fighter to survive that attack, just knowing that your opponent used all those cards, if you could negate that attack, there's like a psychological impact of that.
Sure.
Where they're like, oh man, I just burned all these resources for nothing.
Yeah, especially if they're stacking things like movement and damage and not the accuracy, because they haven't improved their chances to hit it all, but they're going all in on this, and then you make it that much more likely that they've wasted it. We already referenced this, the 2 in-faction push cards they have. It's Call of the Grave, and what's the other one? Is it Frightful Aspect?
So
Frightful Aspect is just a equivalent to Distraction, which is an amazing card in and of itself. Call of the Grave, run that down for us real quick.
Sure. Choose an enemy fighter, push them up to 2 hexes towards a friendly fighter.
And once the battlefield it's not the closest, it's a friendly fighter. So once the battlefield is kind of all mixed around, it's real easy to find a way to use that to pull somebody in any direction that you might care to pull them. This is kind of unheard of disruption if you are distraction, frightful aspect, call of the grave. Like it is rough, and it is great against aggro. It's great against objective play who are trying to stand on a 2 hex push is real hard to bounce back from, because if they got sidestep in hand, or you know quickening greaves or what have you, that's one thing, but uh, those those can't counter a 2 push, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think the only real solid defense against this is like, what's it called? Shadow form, I think, is a spell where if you cast it for the rest of the round, you just can't be pushed.
Yeah, there's
But
a stone form which makes you a quarry -1 move, and you
oh,
just
but that
can't
yeah,
be
that
pushed. There's
one's
that,
rough.
and there's a can't be chosen by gambits, but they're all of them have like pretty rough downsides. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and even including them in your deck, like you're you're taking up space just for this one matchup, and that's basically untenable. So, um, yeah, that's really strong.
well, let's talk. What else? What else really calls you there, Cam?
Sure. Probably one of my favorite ones also, Chilling
Mm,
Scream. Your opponents cannot play power cards, persist to the end of the power step. It's a better no
mm,
time, um, because it doesn't preclude you from playing power
sure.
cards. But it's definitely one of, I play either right after my first activation in a round, usually round 2 or 3 if I can hold
Yeah.
on to it. Just to, if I do a big push myself, I just prevent my opponent from stacking a bunch of buffs and then killing out my key
Right,
fighter.
because often the advantage of that second activation is that you get to use a bunch of power step stuff. You're like, okay, cool. The banshees went first, but at least I'll counterpunch harder. And here you say, no, actually, you won't. So it gives
Yeah,
like you're saying, it gives the banshees the first real hard hit, because you will have the first opportunity to power up, right?
Exactly.
Um, when else do you so early? But when else would you have you found as a good time to be playing this? Because I'm asking you because this is particularly, I think, a high. We've talked about this sort of before. It's a high skill cap card. Like it's there's really great things you can do with this sort of card if you know your timing and know how and when to use it. So early, and when else?
I've used it mid to late game as well. I know that basically hits everything, but usually near the end, well, like one of the last power steps, just to make sure that my opponent can't do anything else. So maybe they have a couple pushes in their hand. Let's say I'm going second, and I notice they have set up 2 fighters right next to 2 objectives, or 2 of them are on one objective. I know I can easily or potentially knock one of them off with a attack or even with a drive back. But if they have a sidestep or something in there, I can quickly just shut them down from any of their high scoring in phase objectives.
Yeah, and I think that's a great one with all these objective warbands out there. Like you said, disrupt them and then keep them from using, because often they have a huge hand of tricks that they're doing to try and they're gonna often again hold on to those until pretty late uh, in order to make sure that there's nothing else that can disrupt them. And this is again a card similar to Dissipate, where if you know what's out there, then all of a sudden you're pressured, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't hold my pushes until the fourth round, because if I do, I may not get a chance to use them. So yeah, big time. Uh,
Right. I guess the final time that I would key in using it is if I'm setting up my, if I know I have a very strong setup for myself. I've played it sometimes as a, hey, I have distraction and call of
mhm.
the grave, and I know I can just stop them if they're maybe like 3 hexes away from me, or if I'm pulling them through a lethal or two, making sure that they don't interrupt me in the
Sure.
middle of it.
Right, right. You get to make sure your combo get out. I would say the only way in which no time has any kind of advantage is that because it no time does block gambits played during the next rounds, or not. Sorry, during until the next power step. So it'll keep you safe from reactions. For instance, if you were worried about something dissipating, you could no time and prevent the dissipate from being played until the next power step. But that's I think in general, Chilling Scream probably has more utility. How about out of faction? How about anything else you particularly like?
Yeah, I like a lot of the other pushes. The easiest shout out, of course, is Restless Prize, just to disrupt my opponent even
Mhm.
further and to counter their own Restless
Mhm.
Prize.
Yep.
Speaking of prizes, Irresistible Prize and Center of Attention are also very good, just because both of them, if I'm already disrupting my opponent, suddenly I'm pulling one of their fighters 1 to 3 spaces, and then pulling in a center of attention on them. I have a massive impact across their entire
Mhm.
board state and can really mess with a lot of their plans or
Sure.
support.
Well, and then back to Restless Prize. Not only is it disruption, and say I take in my Reavers, it's fine. It's real powerful for disruption, but it's maybe not doing me a whole lot, like not directly benefiting me. It is messing up my opponent. For you, you can not only mess up your opponent, but you can set up hexes to make it real easy to get your fleeting memories
Yep.
or pull one of those evens out and get your one will. So you benefit in a lot of ways from it besides just messing up your opponent, which makes it a particularly powerful card to include. So if it wasn't auto
Definitely.
include in other decks, it probably is for this one. Phil, Cam, any other gambits we want to hit before we move along?
One that I like, although I not you know not being a Mournflight player myself, I don't know if maybe it's used all that much, but I really like Enervating Sorrow, which is a reaction where when your opponent plays a ploy, before it resolves, they have to choose to discard another power card, or the ploy is not resolved. Um, and I like that it both gives you an opportunity to interrupt a ploy, which is not something you can usually do very easily. But then it also has another tax on top of it if they do decide they want to be able to continue playing their ploy,
Mm-hmm.
which can be a really strong psychological blow where your opponent's like, oh man, I had this whole thing planned out. I had all these cards that I was planning to use, and then all of a sudden it gets just blown apart.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just like design space like that, and we don't see it very much in this
Yeah.
game. So um,
Hmm.
I like having those
I
opportunities.
guess my instinct on that card is that it's more powerful the more empty your opponent's hand is, because they're less likely to have something that they're just, this is something I don't care about. They're down, or they might have nothing else left, and then you've definitely got it. So, um, anything else we've talked about some of the movements. So, spectral wings can be great for letting you do more of your movement shenanigans, scoring your stuff, inspiring as well as because I remember, sometimes I
Hmm.
would see don't quite have enough hexes to do everything you want. So you'd say, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna score one will, or uh, sorry, not one will. I'll score fleeting memories and inescapable hunger, but I won't be able to inspire because I need another couple hexes, and sometimes I can let you get multiples of those out at the same time. Um, anybody got any other gambits we want to hit before we move along?
I think we talked about it already and mentioned it in passing, but obviously distraction.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oof. Double
Always a good
distraction
choice.
and a 2 hex push. Yeah, oppressive. I think I know it's some of the end of some of our power steps. Like the board state is so wildly different than when it started because you've done so much pushing around that, like, oh man, I'm just gonna chuck the old plan and start from scratch here because it's not anything like it was at the start of this. How about upgrades? I gets a little thinner here. On my scan there weren't as many upgrades as I thought. Like, oh, these are as solid gold as some of the objective and gambits are, but that's fine. But what upgrades do you like, Cam?
Sure. The first one, I got to give a shout out to Arcane Siphon. It's just a very niche one that I found. It gives you new action. Choose an enemy fighter within 3 hexes. Pick a fighter's upgrade. It's discarded. And then you roll an attack dice, and on a smash or crit, you discard Arcane Siphon as
Give
well.
me
So you got a
yeah,
50 chance of keeping it around,
give me
too.
the top 3 favorite upgrades you've trashed on somebody with this.
Ooh, Sudden Growth,
Oh
just to kill
my.
fighters.
Yeah,
Yep.
I had a very sad
Um,
Garrick looking across at Ghost that was about to peel his sudden growth off. It was bad times.
I guess earlier in Beastgrave before the FAQ, I think I peeled off a Crown of Avarice, and that was really nice
Oh
just to
yeah,
pick up the extra one. And then I think I took off a Tome of Glories once on a Tome player too.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Oh yeah, because that not only you take away all the glory they get for reading it, but the glory that they'll score at the end. That's a high value. That's a high value rip right there. Oh,
Yeah.
Yep.
thievery. Good choice. Good rogue choice. Phil, any of them jump out to you?
So when we first tested these guys out, one that I ended up liking a lot, but I didn't think that I would when I initially read it, was Hollow Hatred, which lets you reroll a dice in the attack of the first attack that this fighter makes in each round. So it balances nicely where normally getting rerolls all the time is really powerful, and they restricted Awakened Weapon for that reason. And so I felt like this was an interesting way of designing to help mitigate that. But then when I sort of thought about it, usually fighters only make one attack around anyway when they're melee, because they charge when they're going to make their attacks. So I ended up actually really liking that because it effectively felt like an in-faction Awakened Weapon.
Yeah, but not so powerful that it is in restricted territory. So I found sometimes with this, because the Condemners, who I played a little bit more, have a similar one. It can slightly be awkward where you'll attack somebody who's standing next to you, and then before you go charging off somewhere, you're like, "Oh, I'll draw a power card," and you draw this, and you're like, it's
Oh,
not doing
yeah.
me any good this round. But yeah, it is solid. Cam, anything else in the upgrades? In faction or out?
Yeah.
Go.
In faction, debilitating
Oh
aura.
yeah.
It's a quick upgrade. It's basically a better version of the Thorns one, where as a reaction you can roll a dice and you'll get -1 dice to the opponent. This one's just a flat out, if your attack action to adjacent enemy fighters, or just -1 dice to a minimum of 1.
I like that your reference point was was a relatively obscure Thorns card that most people probably forgot existed. um, this is pick a guy, pick a Banshee and make them the Knight's Herald, and a real pain. Remind me, is this one? I know you just said, is it only when attacking this, or is it any attacks by someone adjacent?
Just all attacks adjacent.
Yeah, rough. Okay.
The thing that bugs me about this one, and this is not a knock on this card, but a knock on the spell design of the similar card of, I think it's Terrifying Visage, where I think that's only for the round, and you have to roll a channel to get it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, I think there was at least at one point maybe a thought that spells were going to be so strong that they needed to be able to like balance them out with the rolls.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get the exact same mechanic that lasts forever on an upgrade, and it's kind of like,
Well,
okay.
Yeah. what I think makes this particularly powerful, we've already is these fighters are already pretty defensive, right? So
Right. Yeah.
with between dissipate and 2 dodge, and then once you start losing dice, man, crit fishing got a lot harder. So a good choice. I think I put Swooping Dash. It's a big speed buff, and for the same reason that I bring up Spectral Wings, it just lets you do more cool things. And when you're trying to do your attacks, if you're doing any kind of aggro, the range 1 really benefits from that increased speed.
Yeah.
How about out of faction? Anything anybody's excited about there?
The easy call out is Spectral Armor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Survival instincts for the same reason, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Or why not both?
Yeah.
And while we're on that topic, I would say if you can afford the restricted slot, I think they can potentially benefit quite a bit from Spirit Bond. Any fighter who's rolling lots of dice really likes this, and if you're throwing 4 dice with 1 or 3 dice, whatever the case may be, and then on your defense, as you stack those up, all of a sudden a lot of faces are looking like successes there. So big
Definitely.
deal there. Do you ever put weapons on your Banshees, or any attack action upgrades that you find attractive?
I threw an Amberbone Axe in my most recent deck just because it's too good of an upgrade to have right now. Um, I'm guessing, assuming we're going to have an Amberbone Spear. If we get one of those, the extra range and the breaking it for additional glory is probably going to sway me to throw that instead of the Amberbone Axe.
Sure.
The fact that the Banshees, uh, the Anguish one, and oh my god, I'm blanking on the Screaming Maiden, both of them require you to make their actual card printed attacks to get their bonuses, means that I don't value weapons as
That makes
much.
sense.
What I do like is Prize Vendetta, especially with the updated
Mm,
FAQ
yep.
for it. Just rerolling as many dice as you want is
Yeah.
nice.
That's a good call. And when you're on swords, you're likely to have quite a few that you could afford to reroll. So, yeah, imagine you're going with the maiden four sword. Roll one sword. Well, it's effectively a +3 dice. Upgrade. So, big
Exactly.
time. It's worth mentioning in light of the most recent Forsaken and Restricted is I think Veil of Grief is at their +1 wound upgrade.
Yeah.
They've got that in faction now, so that and Great Fortitude, and few things more demoralizing than figuring out like engineering a way that you could maybe take one down and then they just get out of range just purely on wounds. So uh, it's another thing that increases their survivability and makes them real hard to get glory off of.
Yeah.
Yep.
We have any other cards, upgrades or otherwise, that we want to touch before we kind of get some of the bigger picture stuff?
I'll give a quick final shout out to Blazing Soul.
Oh,
I
yes.
found
Yep.
that yes, I found that I've used that more on the Widow more than
Hmm.
anything, just to get that extra movement for the teleport.
Yeah.
It also helps if I have two fighters, two surrounding friendly fighters inspired.
Yeah, that's a real good call. And so the widow, like you said, it can unlock her ability to do her tricky stuff. But also, I know I'll be coming and kind of doing the math like the only people left that haven't charged are not particularly accurate and are not doing much damage. And then you'll Blazing Soul somebody like, well, never mind. They now they're super accurate and faster than I thought and hitting harder than I thought and everything is terrible. So yeah, I that's a good call, and especially for them because they have ways to passively score glory. So uh, you can passively get that glory and then selectively pick whichever fighter is the tool for the tool from the tool bag that you need to do the job and upgrade that one. Let's talk overall strengths and weaknesses, and we've kind of covered this in general, but let's be specific about it. Uh, let's Cam, why don't you throw out what have you found has been some of the strongest aspects of this faction as opposed to others that you've played?
They are incredibly tricky. And I think that's something that can't be underestimated. Um, like we said, with all their cards, they're just very, very reliable in a lot of their pushes and fast scoring. They're a very well-rounded warband, especially with all their
Hmm.
disruptions. The fact that all the inspired fighters have some other extra mechanic on top of them basically means they have a free upgrade or a free gambit as a reaction or as a move, if you
That's a good
will.
way to
Yeah.
think about it. Yeah. uh,
So they're very good with action
mhm.
economy.
um, Phil, you got anything that you found as a particular strength for them?
Yeah. Cam sort of said it, but I think the fact that they're so well balanced, just like, I think it's hard to, you know, really comprehend until you start getting into a game how strong it is to not really have that dangle bro on the team. Um, if you're aggro into these guys, there's no easy point to start attacking from, and that means that you're probably sort of starting to fight uphill, and you never want that. And then on the other side, they're fast enough and accurate enough, although maybe not immediately, that when they're the ones that want to be on the offense, they can still get to you and do what they need to, without having to worry about getting blown up. Which um, so they're kind of like the jacks of all trades. They can kind of do a little bit of everything, but at the same time, they don't feel like they have a really heavy weakness to go with it.
Mhm. And then I mean, that was my core thing. Is it feels like every time I played against them, they seem incredibly flexible, uh, to the point that, and I'll ask you this question in a second, but to me, it feels like when if I win rolls for the boards to decide whether I want more objectives or to set the boards in a particular way, like I don't know which way to go. I think they're probably happy either way. Like, they're happy to have three, or they're happy to have board control and diagonal offset them and make your life miserable. Um, do when you win the roll, is there any particular one you lean towards, or is it matchup dependent, or what have you found, Cam?
With my Disruption playstyle, I like to choose boards, especially if it's like the first game in a series, just because Molten Shard Pit and having that three lethal right in my opponent's face, and the fact that I have up to four pushes, I can just quickly kill a bunch of things without ever making an
Mm-hmm.
attack.
And actually, mentioning Molten Shard Pit is a good point. Another strength that we've kind of glossed over is ignoring lethals in Beastgrave is a really big deal. There's a lot of damage that comes from lethals, and
That's true.
they don't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about starting with two dodge right away. I know, playing a lot of aggro war bands, it feels miserable to engineer a way to go and get a hit on somebody and know that they're going to be rolling two dice at you. And when you get that one success, and you're crossing your fingers hoping you don't see, or even if they're, two dice crit fishing is, it can feel pretty bad too. Um, and that's, we had a listener mention that if you think a lot of their power comes from not needing to inspire to get to those two defense dice, and you can compare that directly with the thorns that you've played for so much.
Yeah, I think it lends a lot of their ability. And I guess to circle back on Phil's point, like I said, we don't have any Dangle Bros in it. Everyone hits hard and they're more resilient than at first glance, especially when you don't get those early inspires or even mid game inspires. You're still never in a position where, unless I guess they have ensnare or something, it's still two dice. It's not
Mm-hmm.
bad at all.
Yeah. Let's talk weaknesses. What do you feel like they have for weaknesses, if any?
Um, Part of their learning curve, I think, is knowing when to be aggressive and when to be more defensive. Because I definitely ran into situations early on when I would build them a little bit more aggro and just throw Lady into a situation where she didn't need to be, and even rolling three dice on swords, it's not the most accurate attack, and then she's just kind of hanging out
Yeah.
there. And if I don't get that inspiration, then she's not getting pushed around if my opponent like leaves her in the middle of the board and goes after someone else because she charged early. Uh, they, I hate to blame dice for a lot of things, but in some cases they can live and die by the
Sure.
dice.
I've had some games against them turn bad because I've forced them into a bad enough position where they say, well, I guess I'm going to charge with the widow and try to hard roll, a two fury attack against whatever. But if that goes off, that was three damage from an uninspired fighter, flying in from the back. And so it'll cut both ways. But yeah, three swords. Uh, Although we've seen statistically it's about as likely to hit as two hammers on against most things. It feels all the swingier because you have those times where you throw three dice and don't see a single success. But yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Any weaknesses you thought needed to get hit, Phil?
I mean, it's not a real strong weakness, but I do think that um, having a four fighter warband is in some ways a weakness, because if anybody does happen to get going and gets one kill, all of a sudden you don't have enough fighters to fill all your activations unless like you can just make attacks or something.
Which can be difficult because you're range one, so
Right.
it's not like a Mollog or someone who can probably stand and swing multiple times.
And having played Curse Breakers, I know that starting to run out of action starts to put you in a corner a little bit. And so while I think that it's not the biggest deal because they do have four, not three to start, like Stormcast do,
Mm-hmm.
I think it does still have the potential to be this limiting factor where if things don't go well in round one, you're probably suddenly looking at a very different game.
Let's move on to the game itself. So we've been talking about your play style, and it feels like it's as you've been describing as disruptive. I guess control is probably a uh, pretty good descriptor, like a defensive control archetype, such as it is. You're keeping them from scoring their stuff and then counterpunching hard with yours. Would you say it's pretty accurate? And have you tried any other play styles in that, Cam?
Yeah, I definitely would. I didn't put it as a control initially because it doesn't fit the standard. I'm going to hold my objectives and play more defensively because they can be very versatile.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, beyond the regular disruption of, I guess, with Grimwatch and Thorns being so big and objectives being huge in the meta, um, them with all their multiple pushes and being resilient really messes with your opponent's plans, especially with all the gamuts that we mentioned earlier. And I feel they are very good counter in the right
Mm-hmm.
hands.
Especially if you, I think that power increases if you have a good understanding of what your opponent is trying to do, right? Like all that disruption tech is
Definitely.
not going to do you any good if you don't have a good sense of what they're trying to do. Yeah, did you ever try an all out aggro? Have you seen that? I guess I've maybe played against it the once, but the typical Mournflight deck I've seen is similar to what you're trying to do, just by degrees of how passive it is or is not.
Yeah, I tried it more aggro in my first few go arounds with it when it first released with Dreadfane. And I found that the accuracy uh, early game was a really big
Mm-hmm.
hindrance to it. So definitely playing the patience game, the
Mm-hmm.
long game, suited me more. As a quick example, I played a game about a week or two ago where I made one attack action the entire game and won 12-7.
Oh, and how many enemy fighters did you kill?
I killed 3 rats. They respawned once or twice, but
Yeah,
I killed 3 rats. It was
so it's
great,
all mostly is the one attack and then a bunch of pushes, huh?
pretty much.
Excellent.
To add insult to injury, I think that one attack was an amber bone attack.
Oh
So
my goodness.
Rough. So those are what we've been seeing. Matt Martin was asking, since their official release in Beastgrave, do we feel like they've had an impact? Have they defined the meta, or have they been kind of a non-entity in that regard? I'll throw this one to Phil first, and we'll come back around to you, Cam.
Um, I I think that they I don't think we've seen them much yet. And I think that's pretty much just because before the most recent update to the FAR, um, it was so easy to build objective decks with Grimwatch and Thorns that people just kind of gravitated to those immediately. And I think, as we've kind of mentioned, there's a little bit of a learning curve with using the Banshees. And I think there are probably people right now that are using them, and they're probably getting to a point where they're going to be disruptive to the meta because they're going
Mm-hmm.
to show up at tournaments and people won't have answers,
Mm-hmm.
is my guess.
Well, and they've won SoCal Open and maybe something Russian, so they've had a presence. I think another factor is that until recently they weren't available in some parts of the world without a little bit of gymnastics as far as ordering, and so I wonder if they fly under the radar a little bit there. Um, but even if you don't include that, it's there's not an obvious. They're not like Thorns where you're saying, okay, what they're going to try and do is stand on a bunch of objectives and all that. Can have a sense from some of their iconic objectives of what they're going to do, but it's not like a standout playstyle where you say, oh, this is obviously what I need to do to counter it. It's that I don't know. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's part of it. So there's not a lot of stuff that's obvious to build towards to counter it. Is that what do you what is your take on it, Cam?
they definitely feel very counter meta to
Mm-hmm.
me, and it's a very good spot to be in, to be that dark horse that if you don't have an answer to them, or even if you kind of have played against them once or twice, they can still be pretty flexible on what they get throughout
Hmm.
a game. Um, I will say that I find them best in a best of three format, just because you could have that first burner match to kind of figure out what your opponent's doing and then know how best to play your
Sure, your
cards.
disruption
Hmm.
becomes more powerful once you have a better understanding, like we were talking about. Uh, Chris Spark wants to know: Do you what are the good and bad matchups? Is there a particular warband or style that you have found to be particularly beneficial, or the reverse in your play?
Um, if they have board choice, I feel like I won't like playing against
Mm,
Thundrix just for the extra range that they get off, because they like to keep you at that 3 to 4 hex
hmm
space. Um, and if they're playing, I guess you have to really leverage your cards in order to have a strong match against them. Anything that's a little bit more aggro against me is a what I would call a better matchup.
better for you,
Definitely for me, just because I can get my
sure.
inspirations. And now you see me, now you don't with shifting reflection and
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
widow,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I remember a backbreaking shifting reflection against you. I thought I had a fighter in a great spot, and all of a sudden he was in the far corner of the board and nowhere near being able to help. Um, uh, so Max, who we were trying to figure out a way to get him on here because he's played a bunch. He specifically has a bad matchup, not against Thorns necessarily, but against Randall's Thorns, and I don't think we can help specifically with what's going on there. Have you played into the Thorns matchup, or do you have any thoughts on that? And they're especially with them being two warbands that you have played a lot of.
So the unfortunate thing, at least in our local meta, is that I haven't played another Thorns player in a while. So I actually haven't got a good chance to play much, I think, if at all, against Thorns, even with like some of the online and events that I've been to. If I had to guess, it's I don't know, it's pretty neck and neck. Um, the queen isn't as scary as she is against the lady as she is to like other warbands, just because you do have that flex and ability to move further and faster than the thorns. The fact that Varklav pushes everyone, regardless of if they've already activated or charged or anything, does kind of mess with my own
Mm-hmm.
disruption that I have. Um, but it also means that they want to inspire by being next to you, and hey, you also inspire by walking through
Sure.
them. So it's a inspiration
My
heavy
my
match.
theory on it is that they have enough glory that they can generate with temporary victory and supremacy and holding objectives. They can generate that fast enough to keep pace with a lot of your passive
Hmm.
things. And then the queen is a powerful piece that if with some of her appearance sort of things that she can get in a spot to take multiple whacks at a banshee, especially one that's already moved perhaps and kind of stuck where it's at. And that can mitigate some of your defensive advantages of, okay, maybe you got a crit on your two defense dice this time, but she's going to have a couple tries at it because of her range too, and her ability to kind of extend her reach into a dangerous spot. And then so she's almost sort of counter disrupting. To say nothing of Howling Vortex is just a pain in the so.
Indeed.
But yeah, those are mine. But we're gonna see if we can't maybe sneak Max on for like a bonus segment that we'll append or have in the off week where he can talk about his trials and tribulations there. Um, any I would add to your comment about good matchups for the Banshees being that aggro thing. It's felt terrible to charge at them with Reavers. It's really coming down to some pretty early dice rolls. Like I'm flying in with Sayek, and I gave him an extra 2 dice. I hope four smash versus two dodge is enough to do it, because if it's not, this game's going to go south in a hurry. Any thoughts from you,
Definitely.
Phil, on matchups?
Not a ton. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I did feel okay going into them with Magors, but I think that was partially because um, Magors are also pretty survivable, just through sheer wounds, if nothing else.
Sure.
And they also like to just sort of be up in people's faces. So there was sort of this just back and forth of dice rolls, as far as I can remember from that game.
Hmm.
So I think maybe they can still match up okay as long as they have some way to engineer some extra dice and some ways to get through dodge.
Yeah. I
Um,
That might be one that is determined a lot by board positioning, right? Like,
oh yeah,
so.
yeah. If
Mhm.
you're long diagonaled, and they choose to just sort of stay away from you, Magors are going to have a bad day for sure, because there's just not enough extra movement in the cards to get you there.
Hmm.
Um, I do wonder how a standoffish curse breakers would do. I think there's some. It'd be an interesting race of like who can rack up more glory faster.
So it's interesting you mentioned that because I got to play that specific matchup. It was maybe not a full standoff curse breakers, but um, crucially they can carry a fair amount, so they can get some passive glory by casting spells, and then they can uh, dig into your wounds by using things like sphere of Akshi and Seged Salvo, so they can do some of this without having to try and burn through your dodge, um, that two dodge, and that's where they make that a little more challenging of a matchup. So I wanted to just kind of close this out with having played against him a fair amount. What I thought were some general tips for counterplay, and these are pretty basic. I don't think they get you too far, but they're just some sort of rules of thumb I use when I am playing against them. And one is when selecting boards, I try to pick a board that has no blocked hexes, um, and unless I'm running calculated risk, also no lethal hexes. Just try and pick some of those wide open boards. So abandoned lair or mirror well are good selections there, because it obviously the lethals are a problem only for me.
Yep.
And the block hexes, if you take that, that makes uh, besides just general play, them being able to play around it, the one objective, which is the help me out. What was that one called?
Nexus of Terror.
No, I'm thinking of hunger,
Oh,
inescapable hunger,
yeah.
keeping them from zipping through that. Makes that a little bit harder. Um, if you have the option to destroy objectives, uh, one will needs an even and an odd. There are only two even. There are three odd. You can make it harder by destroying an even numbered hex. That means they only have one objective lex, an even numbered objective. That means there's only one left that they could use. So destroy them or stand on the even ones. They may disrupt you off of them, but they're gonna have to burn energy to do that. As far as Nexus of Terror, that's a real handy one that they will use. And so for me, like if I've got nothing to do, I'll stand somebody on a hex just to make it that little bit harder. So start standing on your own hexes. Of course, if you're playing Cam, that means you're just setting yourself up for a shifting reflection. But
Yeah.
and then my last tip was if you have the opportunity in the third round, go first unless there's some overriding reason not to. Because what that does is it has you score your objectives first. And when you score your objectives
Oh yeah.
first, then when you
Hmm.
compare for Dominion of Death, you might have just tied it up or pulled in the lead as far as quantity of objectives, and you have a better chance of denying that. So keep that in mind when you're making your decision in the third round. And it probably goes without saying you probably want to forego placing an extra lethal hex token.
Yep.
They
Yeah,
don't
I think
care.
that holds true for both ghosts.
Sure.
You don't gain anything by doing that.
Yeah. Um, Special edge. You got anything else you'd put into counterplay? I'm not gonna make you do anything here, Cam. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for this. But Phil, you got any counterplay recommendations?
It's not really specific to this matchup, but something that I've been finding a lot of success with lately when I'm playing as an aggro warband is take sitting target.
Mm,
It in the current meta with so many dodge, it is a huge, huge game changer when you can just at will gain an extra dice and completely ignore your opponent's dodges. And actually, I guess it even goes well into matchups where your opponent doesn't use dodge because so many people are going on guard right now.
Sure.
Um,
And
Mm-hmm.
the extra dice doesn't hurt uh, anyway. So
yeah, so even if you have no reason to need ensnare, +1 dice is still solid on a ploy. So I've found tons of mileage with that card, and I think it's not going to lose any value anytime soon, given the state of the meta.
okay. Good stuff. Let's we have one miscellaneous question I want to hit. It's from Matthew Martin, and he wants to know who's spookier, Mournflight or Thorns. Cam, as the expert in both, what's your take?
Mournflight, hands down.
All right. Okay. I agree. The Thorns are just, maybe cute. That guy carrying his head, the the one with the goofy metal on his head. Anyway, well, that's going to do. Actually, speaking of Matt Martin, we are shouting out. They have their first big event down there. They got a grand skirmish. They're calling it the Grand Scuffle. It's going to be at Gigabytes Cafe, and it is April 4th of this year. You should go down. They're a bunch of awesome guys. Jeff Osborne can attest. Actually, what I think his direct quote was that they're a bunch of scrubs who his friend was able to beat after playing a deck that he hadn't practiced with. That was the
Yeah.
gist of it, right? That sounds like the Canadian
I think
message.
that's pretty much what I picked up.
All right. So go there for Easy Big Glass. Nah, not really. Those guys are awesome, and they'll talk about it on their cast. But looking forward to them getting their big event. It sounds like they got a cool community down there, and who knows? Maybe Zach Newcomb can blow them all up with Chosen Axes. So. And that does it. By the time this goes out, we'll have had our own event. And then 15 February, we're going to be down in the Rockford area for Cataclysm Games is having a tournament down there, it looks like. So I think I'm tentatively looking to make the journey down there and throw down with those guys. That'll be fun.
Cool. Can I give a quick shout out here? So next week is Las Vegas Open. I'll be going down for 40K. If I don't make the top 8 on Sunday, which I mean, we have 1,000 players, a high chance of me not making
1,000 players
for 40K.
What?
Yeah, it's insane. But if you hear me, feel free to come say hi. I'll probably be playing 40K. And if I'm free on Sunday, I might actually jump into the Grand Clash that's going on there too.
Awesome. I did not do the math, but yeah, we wish you well, and we'll claim you for what the hex if you
absolutely. I'll have you.
All right, sounds good.
But only if you win.
No, who are we kidding? If he gets like top half, we'll be
yeah.
All right, so you can get in touch with us at WTHcast or whatthehexcast@gmail.com. You can always check out our content on themortalrealms.com. That's where we've got the story phase, which is a narrative podcast about the background of Age of Sigmar. We've got Dogs of Warcry, which is all about Warcry. They've started their second season. You should go check it out. And we just love anytime you get a chance to interact with us, like hearing from you. I appreciate that. I should have said at the top probably, if you were expecting this to be Zarbag's Gits episode, that's understandable because that's what we thought we were doing. But we had some recording difficulties there, and we're going to be coming right back with that. Though we're not leaving that in the dust. We've got a good one lined up, and that'll be coming along the line. Your recommended listening for this episode is going to be Time of the Preacher by Willie Nelson and A Ghost to Most by Drive-By Truckers. For What the Hex, I've been Davey.
This is Phil.
And I'm Cameron.
We got there eventually.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I can't wait. Lost all the gold already.